All right. Today, the second day of April 2024 is World Autism Day, and it's a day that we had a conversation about this last week on Monday.
We did.
When we had the ladies who were planning to go and climb Mount Kenya. Do you know what they did?
No, they did. They came down yesterday.
Really?
Yes. They reached the peak and climbed down, and they were back in Nairobi yesterday.
This is Professor Bukusi and her party.
And her team, yes.
And her team. They went up, and it was all because they want to raise awareness. They want to see how much more can we do to raise awareness and to rally people around the conversation around autism.
Yes, it is.
Yep. So World Autism Day is marked today, and that's why we've invited Senator Crystal Asige to come and join us to talk about what is happening on the legislative front, on the policy front. Senator, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. How are you? It's been that long.
It's been a while.
Yes, I remember the last time I was here, I was just about to launch my album, Blinding Allure. So yeah, it's been a while.
How's it performing?
It's going good, yeah. Since then, I came here and I invited you, and unfortunately, I didn't catch you at the launch, but next time, I'm still going to invite you.
Please do.
And after that, I had a meet and greet with King Charles. I met Rio Ferdinand. We went to Iala Games in Kigali. What else did we do? We had Christmas, New Year's. I went to Germany to speak at a leadership retreat for one of the fastest growing tech companies in Germany. Went to Czech Republic to speak to their equivalent of KPLC, the national energy company. Directors there wanted to chat with me about my work and how we can collaborate. And then I was just at the World Bank the other day. They invited me to speak on inclusive transport and mobility in Africa and how they can do better in financing different countries and development projects as World Bank. So yeah, it's been a while.
You've been a busy bee.
You've been busy. You've been quite busy. So we will have a conversation about autism, but first, CT will welcome you with the day's proverb. These proverbs are from
the Republic of Senegal. Right. Trusting in wealth is like looking for feathers in a turtle.
Trusting in wealth is like looking for feathers in a turtle.
Yes.
Senator, what's your interpretation of this proverb?
Immediately, I think the author might be speaking directly to President Ruto to say, if you're looking for wealth for the country, don't look into the coffers of poor Kenyans. You will not find anything there. It's a hard shell.
Look elsewhere.
Look elsewhere, please.
So he should borrow.
No, not borrow, because we're already we're in the pits, as you know, in that regard. But look for more sustainable and more, ways that Kenyans will actually get on board with, rather than forcing them between a rock and a hard place, you know.
There's a statement that you've released ahead of this day today that's talking about autism. Statistics show that 75 million people across the globe are on the autism spectrum.
Yes.
While 1 in 88 children are diagnosed with autism, it reported that more boys are likely to be on the autism spectrum than girls.
Yes.
It's even more alarming to know that more children will likely be diagnosed as autistic than those with cancer, AIDS, and diabetes combined. How is it like in Kenya?
Well, in Kenya, stats are showing us that around 4% of the country are on the autism spectrum. That's about 2.2 million people in Kenya. And we, like you said, are number 46 globally in terms of prevalence of autism. And we're not doing very well, unfortunately, because neurodiverse diseases and conditions have not really been given a seat at the table for a very long time. As Kenyans, I think as Africans, we generally think of disability and we think of a wheelchair.
Yep.
We think of crutches, right? We don't think much about sensory or neurodiverse disabilities, and autism spectrum disorder is in the neurodiverse sort of realm. And unfortunately, if we don't understand something, then we cannot legislate about it. We cannot give regulations over it. And we cannot have people with proper capacity leading those areas in our government, in parliament, and so on and so forth. So many people, I know many parents, many, even people in parliament, parliamentarians have kids with autism, and they don't come out to speak about it, unfortunately, because they are not sensitized, they're not educated around it. And if members of parliament are not educated about autism and what it is, is and how to treat it and how to manage it, then what about 70% of people with disabilities in rural areas in Kenya? Yeah.
Does our health system understand autism?
It doesn't. When I say it doesn't, I mean generally speaking. If you look at other countries and what they're doing to address autism spectrum disorders, Kenya is doing poorly in that area. But there are some efforts, at least I know in my oversight role, I have looked and oversighted over lots of health facilities to figure out how are they giving or providing treatment therapies, treatment centers and facilities in the country for autism spectrum and other neurodiverse diseases. And unfortunately, there are not that many, but those that are there at least are providing some relief to parents and caregivers who have children with autism spectrum disorder. And also, there are laws that still need to be repealed because there's many laws that discriminate, really, covertly discriminate against people with developmental disabilities like autism. And that's probably because they were written and drafted several years ago. People didn't understand what autism is. You see, the thing is, the more we move forward, the more we start to discover more diseases, right? Because what is called autism today was in 1911 called schizophrenia, right? And as years passed, as decades passed and research became better, then we started to realize it's actually not schizophrenia at all. And in 1943, there was a gentleman, a chap called Leo Kanner, who then started to create or lay the foundational understanding around autism in children. And that's when he discovered, or he thought, that boys are more prevalent than girls to get autism. But that's only because in his analysis, the autistic brain, this is very technical, but I'm going to try and make it simple so that all of us Kenyans listening can get it. But like the autistic brain, he thought, was basically just the ordinary male brain, but at an extreme level. That's what he found in his research in 1943. Of course, that then lends a bias toward diagnosing girls with autism, because if your criteria is prevalently predicated on boys, then that's why you see research that shows that boys are 4 times more likely to have autism disorder than girls are. But that's because our criteria since 1943 has been a bit skewed towards boys. The poor boy child, I'm telling you. But since then, people like Simon Bowen-Cohen have busted that myth, and we have better sort of like ways to assess autism. And it's thought that the reason in 1943 that was the case, it's because kids, or rather girls, when they're children, are more sort of a bit more advanced in the learning. They sort of like learn faster, they speak quicker than young boys in their age group, they're potty trained faster, they walk quicker. So generally they're a little bit more advanced as children. Girls are to boys, and therefore the diagnoses or the symptoms of autism go under the radar, you see, because they're a little bit more advanced between 0 and 7 years old. So it's more, you can see it more in a boy than you can a girl, in short. And also research shows that genetically speaking, girls are more resilient to the autism sort of genetic, the genome. And so it goes masked, in short, is what I'm trying to say. And this is the reason why these sort of statistics of there are more boys with autism than girls can sort of, throw some confusion into the pot. Yeah.
What is the need? Because we talk about communication, and we talk about awareness about some of these things. And then we talk about, when we're looking at legislation, to then grant or to give or to then demand what is required. All of this based on information and awareness. But what's the need today when we look at some of these, when we look at autism spectrum, for example, and other disabilities? What's the need today that's going towards legislation that has to happen in order for us to see some kind of breakthrough, whereby we're not always talking about let's consider. What are the needs?
I think, number one, people need to see disability as part of their reality rather than it's over there somewhere. It's in my neighbor's house. It's down the street. Disability is not something to do with me personally. And so therefore I don't prioritize it. And this is what happens, for example, in the recent BPS cycle. Disability was given very little budgetary allocation because there's no one, or there are few parliamentarians perhaps who understand the dire need for more equitable allocation with regard to disability in this country. And so they say, oh, okay, I mean, you're only about 1 million people, so let's just give you kidogo pesa, you know, rather than actually the statistics are completely wrong and it's been proven, reports have shown, there's lots of CSO players, stakeholders themselves, PWDs, myself included, who have, you know, tried to shout on the rooftops that the census was wrong in 2019. We're way more than just about 1 million. In fact, WHO now estimates that every country has about 16% disability rates in the country, which makes us, I guess, about 7 point something million, if that's divided by 55 million overall. So we are more people and we need more budgetary allocation. That's number one. And without that being prioritized in BPS cycles, it's never going to improve. Then the second thing I think is the Ministry of Health needs to take a much stronger stand on matters of disability, matters of, especially like we're talking about today, autism and other neurodiverse disabilities, which are invisible disabilities, which are very much mistaken for madness, for retardation, for, you know, people being, in quotes, imbeciles, you know, things like this, and are locked away. They need to make more of an effort to sensitize parents so that parents can be the sort of like the first responders at home. Because, you know, when you take a kid home from labor ward, you're the one who's monitoring that child.
Yeah. Right.
And it's between 0 and 2 where you can actually, you know, get a proper diagnosis for these types of invisible disabilities. So parents need to be trained on, if you see this kind of behavior, if you see repetitive movements, if you see that your child is not really speaking a lot, etc., then this is what you do, ABC, and go to these kind of facilities to be assessed. But that's not given to us. You're just taken home and saying, you know, basically all the best. Yeah. Go home and
now grow.
Correct. Bring us more children.
Yeah.
Right. So early intervention is really important, really key. It won't cure autism, but at least when you catch it early, you're able to manage it, and that child will be able to live a very full and healthy life. And then after training of parents and caregivers as first responders, I think that society needs to change. We've talked about this many times. Mindset is so important. How you treat people, how kids treat each other, because a lot of bullying happens in schools. I mean, kids can be really, mean, and because they don't understand and their parents don't teach them, you know what, boy in school, you shouldn't tease him. It's because 1, 2, 3. That's just how he reads. That's just how he talks. That's just how he interacts with other kids. But he's not less than you are. So those kinds of conversations are very, very important at a basic level.
But then I bring you back to the question that I asked earlier: is our health system tuned to understand this neurodiverse disorders? Like you said, from sensory to neurodevelopmental disorders, is our health system attuned to this? Many children now are born in health facilities, all right? Many children will then go for clinic. After every so often, they are taken to clinic and there's that booklet so these healthcare workers, when they're interacting with this child, they'll be able to notice it. Are they trained to notice? Are they trained to ask the parents and the caregivers the right questions? Because if you come in with your child and the doctor lifts the baby, puts the baby down, and the doctor does not ask any question, then you think, well, whatever I was thinking, or maybe I was wrong. Or if you say, my child has not talked ataongea, is the health system trained to understand this?
Unfortunately not. We have very, very few specialists in the neurodiverse sort of space, and we are seeing a lot of brain drain going on. I mean, especially in the healthcare system, we're seeing nurses being shipped off, people who the government spends a lot of time and money and resource training, then go away to the UK, Canada, etc., because they feel that there are greener pastures there. And so when that happens, there is a brain drain, and therefore we are losing the the investment that we're putting in a lot of medical professionals. That's number one. Number two, the reason why they're not they don't have capacity, our healthcare system, is because in Kenya we are very reactive, unfortunately. So what you're saying is actually what happens, for example, in Western countries. My sister, when she had her baby a few years back, her caregiver, her medical professional used to come to her house almost every week to check the progression of this child. How are you doing? Apart from you as the mother, how you're feeling post labor, how's the child doing? What are the milestones that they're hitting? How has he reacted or acted in the last few weeks? Constantly assessing.
Yeah.
But in Kenya, what we're doing is reactive, meaning we're waiting for the parent to come to us years later and say, by the way, this is what's wrong with my child. I've noticed this for 5-6 years. Can you help him or her? When it should be the other way around. It should be, like you say, at the ward, when you leave the ward, there should be, okay, in 2 weeks' time, come and we do this assessment. In 2 weeks' time after that, come we test for vision, we test for hearing, we test for developmental sort of markers, so on and so forth. But we don't do that. And I think, as usual, we'll always say, or we'll always be told that there's no budget for that. We're already very strained. And so our children suffer. And we get people who live life isolated, live life discriminated against because they were not given sort of the attention they needed at the very beginning. And then, autistic people are extremely brilliant. Like, I don't know why people don't really understand that. There are some of the greatest minds on the face of the planet in history are autistic. Tesla. We have Charles Darwin. We have, of course, Albert Einstein. Bill Gates, the government's best friend almost. He's got autism. He's got autistic as well. So people who are absolutely brilliant, and there's a potential for those people to be in Kenya. Those kids are growing up here, but they are not given an environment to support them so they can grow up to be successful in life. That is the problem. And so we always talk about barriers. Disability is not actually the barrier. It's not the issue. It's the barrier, right, that causes the disability. My impairment, when it meets a barrier, causes disability. That's the equation. And same thing for people with autism. And it's really a shame because there's a lot of potential and lots of parents and kids who are suffering because our country, our healthcare system doesn't get it.
The healthcare system populated by people, hopefully people who are trained in that field. This gentleman you mentioned, the one who started figuring out autism in 1946.
43.
Well,
Leo Kana.
I thought I'd give him just 3 years for the a little bonus.
Grace period.
A little bonus early in the morning isn't too bad. He seemed to have figured this out because remember what you said. He took it that these people were highly intelligent. He wasn't entirely wrong, was he? He wasn't entirely wrong. You see, I'm thinking as you're speaking, is it that even as the experts try to understand autism, they are understanding it within the spectrum of their understanding, and perhaps what autism is beyond their understanding, and so they can't easily understand what is actually beyond their capacity. And we start from the point of view of those in the field that we speak of, those who are medically trained. The presumption is that these are some of the brightest people we have in our communities, and they are. Now, when you put them against something they don't fully understand, how are they likely to respond to it? And even when you conduct research, it will be limited to your understanding and what you think you understand by measuring it. What if it's beyond that spectrum? What do you do?
That is a really good point, and I understand. Because what you're saying is that if my measure is low because I don't have a general or a full understanding of an issue, then of course how I measure it will be
it's limited by my own limitations. Yes,
correct. My limitations limit it. Correct. Yes. And see, this is the thing. We're in a third world. Let me say LMIC.
Sorry, let me just assist you. Third World Banana Republic.
Oh my goodness, LMIC, this is where we're at. And so our environment then dictates how we move and how we proceed and how we progress. And I think that because the West have lots of technology, a lot of advances in science, they get these things, from all the way back in 1943 when we were still just, children in independence as Kenya. And so, yes, I believe that he was onto something. It's just that there was a bias towards males, but absolutely. He just said that it's a normal, ordinary male brain, but just working at a much higher intensity. And yeah, if our medical systems, especially from school, when you go and study a discipline, any medical discipline in school, university, then you specialize later, they don't teach you these intricacies. They just teach you the basics. They just tell you, about malaria and how to treat this, how to treat that, but they're not really talking about things that have come and advanced in our world and in science in terms of disability. And so our caregivers, of course, then become, I guess, not redundant in their knowledge, but limited, correct.
But the greater tragedy in our country, though, if you look at it, is that the things we speak of that shatter the glass ceiling in terms of understanding is research. We don't do very much research here.
No. We don't. And the National Council for Persons with Disabilities recently released an autism report. Just last month, actually, they launched it. And when I got my hands on it and I was reading it, I found it to be, even though they mentioned my PWD bill in there, they were like supporting that needs to be expedited. So thank you, National Council. It was limited in the explanations of autism, what it is, what it looks like in Kenya, in our culture, in our environment, and what they are going to do about it, or what they are putting in place to create more sensitization, to forge more research in this field. It was very limited. And in fact, when I looked through it, I could cite many other research papers and reports that I've read over the years, and I was like, okay, but we need our own. We cannot be copying and pasting and relying on research from other countries. So that also limits our capacity in trying to build in that subject matter.
Senator Crystal Asige is our guest this morning. Today is World Autism Day. We're having another autism conversation today. We had a similar conversation last week on Monday. We want to keep having these conversations because we realize, all of us, that there's very limited understanding of autism and all neurodevelopmental disorders. Many people don't understand them. Many people, even those that have children that have neurodiverse disorders, don't even understand what they're dealing with. The caregivers, caretakers don't know. Those in the education sector do not know what to do. Those in the health system, not many of them know what to do. We need to have this conversation, and so that we can mainstream it to make sure that we get to know what to do. The senator is here. She's a member of parliament. She ought to tell us what she's doing, together with her fellow members of parliament, in pushing this towards a proper policy, proper laws, and proper support.
So, Senator, even as we look at these things, I mean, it's clear, but with how we see things, and we talk about 7 million people, and we talk about the things that we are dogged by all the time, that, we'll say there are no resources, and that's the slapstick answer you get for a lot of this agitation or trying to get people to be on the side of right. If there was further understanding, if we even say that the medical field maybe doesn't understand, I've seen a comment here where a gentleman is talking about his daughter having been taken to facility after facility and a different diagnosis every time, but he knows that this child is autistic from other research. If that is wanting, and we're saying that in order to have legislation in place, certain things need to happen, do you see that there would be a direct relation between understanding, communication, awareness, and then action towards making sure that everything is aligned? Medical facilities, understanding, legislation for the outpouring of resources. If there was a further understanding about what really happens with these disabilities, would we see then there would be a direct correlation then between that understanding and action?
I think absolutely yes is my immediate response, because once you understand a thing, then you can access research about it, and then you can legislate around it and put in place regulations. But you have to understand. It's just like when stakeholders come to my office or call my phone or email me and they tell me their problems. Once I understand it, that's when I can, after I listen, that's when I articulate and then look for legislative solutions. That's how the process should go. And the problem, I think, is that there are many other issues that precede disability in people's minds. people prioritize many other things over disability. And in my research, even in inclusive design and transport systems, there was an activist in Bangladesh who said, when the cuts come in any budgetary allocation, they always start with disability because it's not prioritized. That's what, suffers first. And so if we don't have that understanding, then of course we cannot then, go down the correct procedures and solve for these problems. But I think people just need to start taking it on board, on their own.
How do we get people to do this? I'm asking this because I'm thinking of this cadre of worker. We formerly refer to them as community health workers. What do we call them now? Community health promoters.
Promoters.
Yes, exactly. Now, part of their duty is to try and determine at the very, very basic level certain things that may require medical attention at perhaps a health facility or an upscaled health facility. So it means they have to be trained to diagnose. Now, we've had studies in this country that have shown, specifically with malaria, pneumonia, diarrhea, you can actually train people to actually identify, take it a step further within the community, get people who will give you some oral treatment that will sort of like waylay the adverse onset before someone goes to hospital. What am I saying? I am saying the attention that is given to healthcare workers beyond simply having healthcare promoters, the training so that disabilities of any nature can be picked up. You tell them, if a child is 3 months old and does this, the child needs to be taken to hospital so that people can understand. If a child is 6 months old, why this long preamble? There are those who argue that autism can be prevented. There are those who argue that certain signs and symptoms, if noticed by the time before the child is 2 years old, certain remedial processes can be taken and certain things can be done. Unfortunately, they are expensive and they are complex, but that's what they argue. Now, that's autism. What about other complications that are a lot simpler?
I agree. Promoters need to be trained, and this is what I'm saying. We're trying to push for more budgetary allocations in the health ministry so that they can prioritize this matter. But if there are other conditions which the health ministry and the government feel are more detrimental to Kenyans immediately, like malaria, like cholera, so on and so forth, those are the ones which will get the focus. Okay, but there is absolutely a solution with what you're saying, which is if the first responders, these promoters in communities, are trained to identify 1, 2, 3, 4 behavioral anomalies, so on and so forth, then they can tell this parent, this caregiver, go to this facility and get this checked. Take this piece of paper, I've done this assessment, and you need. However, there are not enough trainings or medical courses and things of the sort, education in general, which focus on disability. And this is my issue. This is why I sit around and I fight tooth and nail to champion disability inclusion and mainstreaming, because we're not in the mainstream. Us, we're just like, the version of like a blogger somewhere who blogs about stories and nobody ever reads
second and third class citizens in your own country.
Correct, unfortunately. Yes. And that's actually the truth. It's very unfortunate. However, I think that even as people like us in Parliament who understand disability and people who champion it, people who are parents of children with disabilities in KEDIPA, especially in Parliament, if we continue to raise our voices and to speak on these issues, then there should be the needle should move. But unfortunately, it will not move as fast as the politicians who are talking about circumcision bills. You understand? Yeah, it won't move as fast as that.
Where do you want the needle to move? I mean, what's your focus? What would you like to see happen first before something else?
Well, bills need to be written and laws need to be amended. Currently, there are laws that are very discriminatory of people with disabilities, people with developmental disabilities. Our constitution says that if you have mental disability, you cannot vote, you cannot vie for elections. The Marriage Act restricts people with developmental disabilities from choosing to marry and having children, right? The penal code talks about how people with development disabilities cannot choose or consent to sexual activity, for example. The Mental Act, of 2022 also has restrictions with regard to people of, in quotes, sound mind. And when people don't understand what this sound mind means, it's very broad. People of unsound mind or people of sound, what does that really mean? You know, that needs to be redefined, because that was written back in 2010 when the Constitution was.
If you weren't here, I would have made a snide comment.
Do it.
Well, people who are not of sound mind, they're mostly found in the house you belong to, Parliament. If you look at the decision-making process and the priorities that those people have,
One must question.
You have to doubt
Yeah.
the soundness of their mind, given the mandate that they are elected to do.
Or you have to question who put them there and why.
Now that, my dear, is the heart of the matter.
Correct.
Yes.
Yeah. What is the intention of putting people who are manipulatable, people who don't have msimamo?
Okay. So legal reform is important. You have a bill that you're sponsoring in Parliament. Have you championed, Senator, any sort of coming together of people who can start reviewing all these laws that you've said and start drafting proposals to amend them?
So my PWD bill, which passed in the Senate unanimously last month, 21st of February, alongside Kenyan Sign Language bill, and as the startup bill as well, have provisions that will subsequently repeal or amend relevant acts, subsidiary acts, okay? For example, what I'm talking about in terms of Marriage Act, there is a clause in my bill that talks about giving freedom of choice of who to marry, even if you have a disability or not, and that will automatically amend the Marriage Act in that area. So there is things that are very many good provisions in the bill, and I've done a lot of work, like I told you the last time I was here, with stakeholders of all diverse disabilities, parents, people with disabilities themselves, even children. I even had kids sit down with kids and hear what is it they want, what is it they struggle with in education, and that's why I put together the Learners with Disabilities Bill, which was passed in Senate last year in November. And so there are moves that we are making in Parliament that I'm trying to push for, but at the end of the day, the implementation will be, what they say, rubber meets the road in implementation.
That's when the rubber meets. Is it automatic that if the PWD bill, for example, passes and is assented to by the President, it automatically repeals those clauses in the other bills? Or do you need to come up with an omnibus bill that then deals with clause by clause in the various offending pieces of legislation?
No. There'll be no need for an omnibus bill, because there are areas in this PWD bill where it states expressly that this provision will then, need to amend XYZ, automatically amend this particular law. So that is already in the bill, and this is why we're really pushing for it. Even the National Council in this report that I was saying, the Autism report of last month, talked about how they are, trying to encourage government to expedite the PWD bill of 2023 so that it can repeal and we can be in line with other instruments that we are ratified or we are signatory to as Kenya. But also, I think that there is a need for people like you guys, media, to also speak about these issues and put them at the front of your, news pieces and prioritizing them in your programming, things like that. Because how many people listen to me in Parliament versus listening to Spice FM every day?
Sure. I mean, there's also the assumption that it needs to be somebody who's experienced a condition of disability, somebody who is, it needs to be that person who champions it. And can we not now take ourselves away from that no, we're dealing with people, Kenyans, who need the help, who need the support.
Yeah.
But I think we must also disabuse ourselves from that notion that it must be somebody who is with disability that will then be the one to champion.
Correct. I think we need to remove ourselves from that line of thinking, because if we continue doing that and we are the minority, we're the smallest voice in Parliament, in the executive, in judiciary, then it'll not move any further. I'll give you an example. Leonardo DiCaprio is a champion of climate change, right? Do you think that Leonardo DiCaprio grew up being a climate change activist?
No.
No.
I actually know somebody who, Leo DiCaprio sits on his board at his organization, some Dutch guy. And he told me that lots of people with status are always looking for a cause that they can get behind to improve their image, right? It's just a thing. You guys know that you're in media. So it's just like somebody gives you a pot of issues and you just sort of pick a paper and say, okay, this is going to be mine.
I'm gonna champion this.
Correct. And so people pitched to Leonardo DiCaprio to say, listen, this is what's going on in the world, climate change this, if we reach 2%, we're going to all melt and turn into water, etc., etc. And he took that on as his primary cause. And look at what he has done, been able to do with it, with his platform and with his influence. Not because he's an expert in the field, but because he's got a loud voice. So now...
And because a lot of people listen to that loud voice.
Correct.
Yes.
And he's a celebrity. And he is a white, middle-aged man. That's, let's not get into that. But anyway, but I have an intersectionality. I'm a black, young woman with a disability. And I'm not the loudest voice in politics.
Don't worry, you'll get there.
I will get there, indeed. But for the moment, what I'm trying to push is that more people join this this cause. Even in Kedipa, as the Secretary General in Kedipa, I said to the chair, Tim Wanyonyi, I said, we need to get more members in here who are not people with disabilities alone. We need to get parliamentarians who have kids with disabilities, who just care about the subject matter, because if we just stick together with just the 12 of us, we will not move. It will not be efficient. It will not be effective long term. And so that's why we've been able to get more members within Parliament to join Kedipa, even though they're not with a disability themselves. But what I'm trying to say is this, that more people need to understand that this is important, because statistics are showing us as well that by 2030, which is only in 6 years time, by the way, right? 46% of those aged over 60 will be classified as disabled. So parliamentarians who are there now, those who are our seniors, are going to join this club according to these statistics by WHO. Correct. Whether they like it or not, it's going to happen. You're going to have impaired hearing. You're going to walk a bit slower. You're going to be bending. You'll be walking like a penguin side to side at some point. You will be in this category.
And you'll be seeking to replace body parts.
They already are.
With platinum.
Yes.
Right.
But when you talk about getting the voices louder by increasing the numbers of people who join in this chorus, people who live, people who have, all these things we're talking about, these individuals belong to families. So it isn't as though if one has a disability, the entire family has a disability. No. People who are close to you will know, because they'll be affected by someone's disability. That is where you garner the numbers from to start off with. Because when you garner the numbers, these are people who at least have an idea. Those people who have been known to lock their children up, they have an idea. And these people who have these children have cousins, and the family network makes this group huge.
Right. Let me just touch on this point of lock their children up before I come to that. I have this theory that I've been playing around with for a couple of years now, which is that are people locking up children with disabilities or their loved ones with disabilities as rejection, or is it as protection? Because they know the kind of society that they're going to be letting these PWDs into. Are you locking them away because you don't love them, or because they actually do love them? Right? If you send a child with autism out in the street, like I say in my in my research, and what I'm calling for the whole of this month in World Autism Awareness Month is, kids with disability with autism are prone to wander. They're prone to sort of like get lost, get kidnapped, because they don't have good communication skills, because they are socially awkward, they have involuntary actions and behavior, things like that. And so they are more prone to dangers, of the earth, in the earth. And so their parents, what's the alternative? I'll just keep my child at home. They're safer there. Not because I want to isolate them, but because this country of ours does not protect my child, so I need to do it myself. That's the theory that I'm going with. I just thought of that.
It's a very good theory, and there's sufficient evidence to support it.
Right. So we need to also, as a society, start giving a bit of a break, cut some slack for some parents.
In the studio, sat in that seat, an intersex individual. The support she had was from her mother. Okay? She didn't have any vast education to speak of, just a mother. Now, this young lady is now a student leader. She is an advocate and she speaks loudly about the state that she is in, what she was born with. And when somebody openly speaks about it and the more people hear it, then the more people are exposed to it. You can no longer pretend you don't know.
Correct.
You do know because you've heard. Same thing with what we're saying. One just doesn't stop talking about it. It's not complicated. You just keep talking.
You have to keep talking about it.
We do. Well, I do, and that's why I continue to push bills. I've got 4 bills that I've already pushed. And I've got 6 more that are at pre-pub stage within committees. So those are 10 bills that I hope to have pushed by the time this term is over.
Yeah.
And that will be at least I hope sort of like you say, and the needle moving, but. Absolutely, people around the PWDs need to come and sort of like push this agenda. And even though they're not as informed, maybe they don't feel like they understand it very well, or they're a little bit scared of being ostracized by their peers, their neighbors, their communities. A lot of the time it's fear. Like if I come out and say my child has XYZ, then I'll be looked at this way. I'll be told you're a witch. I'll be told you are, you're possessed. We need to do exorcisms of you and your family. So on and so forth. You know, our culture. Must say our culture. It doesn't help. You know, this is why white people are, this is why the West are forward, because they're more open-minded. And unfortunately, we are not at that place yet. But once we start becoming more open-minded, through the society becoming more accepting of disability, of people who are different from them, people who move differently, speak differently, think differently, act differently. Once as a society, we're just like, okay, yeah, that's a normal thing.
That's okay.
That's just normal. Like, that's just who he is, you know? Then we give a little bit more room to these parents and families to come out and say, like, okay, I feel a bit more confident speaking up on behalf of my child, on behalf of my husband, on behalf of my brother, etc., etc.
Senator, one of the things that you mentioned in the conversations today is about budgetary allocation that go into supporting PWDs in the country. Do you, as KEDIPA, have a position on the next budget? Like, do you have a minimum amount that you're pushing and advocating through your fellow members of parliament and saying, let's allocate this much that goes towards persons with disability in the country to support A, B, C, D?
Well, through KEDIPA, most of our members are in National Assembly, right? National Assembly, as you all know, are the ones who do BPS. We can't touch it in Senate. We just sort of like sit and are spectators on the sidelines. But 700 million as a start is something that can at least boost this sector, because currently the National Council for PWDs get around 200 million to do all their activities, all their programs across 47 counties to make sure that people are registered, to do early interventions, to give assistive devices and equipment, to do trainings and workshops, so on and so forth. 200M peke. Okay, and that's across diverse disabilities, because there are so many different types of disabilities, right? And so 200 million is very, very little.
So your recommendation as KEDIPA for this next budgetary cycle is 700 million?
As a start, yes, because we're trying to be progressive. I know that different commissions will, give reasons as to why it's not as important, because of the numbers, If we are not counted, then we do not count.
Yep. Sure.
If we're not counted properly, then we do not count in these types of conversations, and that's the issue. And this is why we need to push for a special census, right? And I'm trying to, through the majority leader of Senate, trying to be like a chariot.
Have
Senator.
The right numbers.
Correct. Let's just give us some budget to redo the census, but only for disability before 2029 or whenever the next one is. Because right now we're suffering. And because of these numbers, you are telling us, because mko wachache.
This is how much you can give you.
Correct, yes.
Okay. Senator, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
And all the best with all the work that you're doing. We'll keep asking you to come back here, and we'll keep pushing and asking you what you're doing as an individual senator and collectively as KEDIPA and the others. Senator Crystal Asige has been our guest on this day as we all mark the World Autism Day. Keep it here for more conversations. Coming up in the next hour, we'll be talking to a member of the National Assembly, and there
ask them.
we'll ask about the budgets.